Next, we have the paper delivered by Kristine Larsen and Yvette. I think this is you were moderating at this point, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Let me get started. And Kris, let me make you a. Oh, you are already
promoted her.
Thank you, Luke. All right, Kris.
Am I successfully sharing and am I successfully talking?
Succeeding. I can see, I can hear you.
Excellent, thank you. Then let me just figure out where I can, okay. All right, so here we go. This paper is a very condensed version of a 12,000 word magnum opus that I've just completed, coming hopefully to a journal near you. I want to thank Nick Burns for wonderful beta reading and discussions on this topic. The reason why I started doing this was a paper that was published in Tolkien Studies in 2010 by Sherilyn Branshaw. And this was Elladan and Elroy here, the sons of Elrond, as the Dioscuri, the sons of Zeus, the Gemini twins in The Lord of the Rings. And she based her analysis on a 1968 book. And unless Tolkien had a time machine, my deal is you really shouldn't be looking at sources from 1968. You should be looking at sources about a century earlier. So I'm going to take you back to the birth of comparative philology in the late 18th to mid 19th century and the tree of language, where work by many Germans and other scholars, for example, Jacob Grimm, yes, from those Grimms and Grimm's Law, showing the shift in consonants in different languages, led people to understand that many of the languages, especially in Europe, in the Middle East, and into part of Asia, go back to a common root of this Proto-Indo-European. But people took it a step further and they said, if languages could have a common root, why can't mythology have a common root? So there was an assumption on the part of some people that there was a Grimm's Law in mythology, that different mythologies were carried away from the root by the migration of the Indo-European people. And the reason why they even cared about this was they looked at classical mythology and said, some of these stories are really, really strange. How can we explain how strange these stories are? So, for example, if you take the story in Greek and Roman mythology of Kronos eating his children, where did that come from? Well, it depends upon which school of mythology you belong to. And if you've read your On Fairy stories, you know that Tolkien summarizes this. He talks about Max Muller and the so-called solar school, which says that all mythology essentially comes from the sun, dawn, twilight, something like that. And he said that the original mythology was written in a highly metaphorical language. And over time, people forgot that it was a metaphor and started taking it literally. And that is why myths look really strange. And that's why Mueller said, quote, mythology is in truth a disease of language, a quote that Tolkien uses in his paper. Now, there was also a related school called the meteorological school, which said that it wasn't that everything came from the sun, it came from storms and thunder. So if we look at the story of Kronos eating his children, they would interpret that as the sun eating the clouds away. Now, a decade or so later, Andrew Lang came out and really put the smackdown mercilessly on Mueller and his school. And he said that myth was based on a shared human experience that we all feel. And this is what Tolkien is, again, remember that this essay was written in honor of Andrew Lang. And Tolkien said, quote, philology has been dethroned from the high place it once had in this court of inquiry, based on Lang's smackdown of Mueller. So how would the Lang school interpret that myth? Well, the reason why we had myths of Kronos eating his children, according to Lang, would be that primitive people actually did know cannibals. Now, after Tolkien reviews these two schools, he basically says that neither one of them he feels is appropriate, and he develops his wonderful theory of subcreation that we all know and love. But it turns out that Mueller's ideas are not completely wrong. If you look, for example, at the famous equation, Daius equals Zeus equals Jupiter equals Tyr, even scholars today think that there's a kernel of truth in that, that perhaps there really was some sort of solar cult in Proto-Indo-European times. I'm not going to take that discussion a little too far, but Mueller should not be completely ridiculed. Here's my equation. Tolkien equals sponge. Tolkien knew comparative philology. He knew about the scholarly debate surrounding comparative mythology. Many of the players involved in this were related to Oxford, so I'm wondering if it was in the water. The relevant books that I'm going to base my interpretation on were widely read in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And it doesn't really matter whether this interpretation of mythology was right or not. What matters is that it was popular and it was talked about, and Tolkien knew about it. And one of the central questions in all of this was, why are there so many twins in mythology? They usually go back to the Rig Veda, written in Sanskrit, and you have the Ashvins. These are solar twins connected with the sun, dawn, evening star, twilight, pick your poison. The Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux from Greek mythology, Romulus and Remus in Roman mythology, Hengist and Horsa in Germanic mythology, and the list goes on and on. So why so many twins? And the answer is, they obviously, anyone who asked that question doesn't know anybody that's had twins, because twins are a rare-ish event, about 1 in every 50 births. There's something a little eerie about identical twins. There is a higher chance for medical problems in the birth of twins, especially before modern medicine. So it is not surprising that many superstitions and legends grew up about twins from around the world. Now, in this whole thing, there's something called the myth of dual paternity. And a lot of it derives from different versions of the story of the Gemini twins. To remind you, Zeus, in the form of a swan, came upon Leda and birthed upon her 4 children, 2 sets of twins, Helen of Troy and Clytemnestra and Castor and Pollux. And depending on different versions of the story, the paternity could be either all Zeus, or who knows, or some of the twins were born from Zeus, some of the twins were born from Leda's mortal husband. And mixed in all that, you get this mixture of mortal and immortal. So Pollux was immortal and Castor was mortal in some versions of the story. This really comes to a head in the works of biblical scholar J. Rendell Harris, who said that after looking at mythology from around the world, that all myths could be boiled down to 2 fears: fear of storms in the sky and fear of twins. And he thought that all religions, except Christianity, of course, derived from what he called the cult of the heavenly twins. And he wrote 3 very popular books laying out this. So here are some of the what he thinks is the rubric, okay? So twins are related to taboo because of an unnatural birth. Because they are taboo, they are exiled and they found their own kingdoms. They have shared names, or they're named the son of one person. There's that mixed paternity, one immortal, one mortal. They are associated with heavenly bodies, such as the sun. They're associated with horses and sailors. They are frequently in the roles of protectors, especially the protector of a sister or another female relative. They are skilled healers, and they are the guardians of truthfulness, and they are appealed to by those who make contracts and take oaths. So where does this come in to Tolkien? In looking through Tolkien's works, twins pop up. And even though Tolkien does say in The Peoples of Middle-earth that twins are a rare thing among the Eldar, you find twins popping up in the weirdest places. So let me show you the 9 sets of twins that I found. I'm going to have to adapt the template just a tad. Rather than have it be taboo, we're going to say it's tragic. Sometimes when you have people sharing names, we know they're not supposed to be twins. Rather than one being mortal and one being immortal, that's the half-elven right there. And rather than saying that these are people who are related to making contracts and taking oaths, these are people for whom oaths play an important part or oaths play a role in their death. So we can go all the way back to one of Tolkien's earliest works, the Tale of Calervo. In the original Kalevala, Calervo, remember, who had an incestuous tryst with his sister, the sister has no name, and the sister was not his twin. Tolkien, to make the incest even worse, and perhaps for other reasons, decided to make it a twin and gives his sister a name, Winona. So how does this fit my rubric? You can see here, red means it doesn't fit, green means it does fit. So yes, it's tragic. The names do not rhyme, but the names are highly symbolic. Calervo means wrath, Winona means weeping. We are subverting the trope of the brother protecting the sister. What happens is that the brother actually causes the sister's death. And we're also subverting this because the blue-robed lady of the forest tries to save him rather than him trying to save a female character. Oaths. There is an oath of revenge to avenge his father's death. He does manage to do this, but at what cost? He ends up throwing himself on his sword at the end of the story. Then we go to the lay of Otro and Atrun. We don't even have names for these twins. It's the man-child and the infant Maid. Definitely completely tragic story. The healer is subverted as well, because again, the illness here is infertility. It is cured by the Corrigan, but it is, remember, there's this Christian element to the story, and using that, the Corrigan's potion to cure the infertility is considered bad. And in terms of oaths, the Lord does not honor the payment owed to the Corrigan, so she curses him to die. We also have Sigmund and Signy of the New Lay of the Volsungs. Again, incredible tragedy. Again, we have incest. We have names that we see here are similar, Sigmund and Signy. Once again, the healer trope is subverted because Signy actually uses magic to disguise herself to conceive a child with her brother. We again have an oath of vengeance, which goes, I mean, they do get vengeance, but at the end, pretty much everybody ends up dying. Now we go from those stories where he's adapting other people's works to creating his own works. So if we go to Halif and Haldar, which is another set of fraternal twins, again, we have tragedy. We do, in this case, have the founder myth because Halif is the leader of their people. Their names are similar. We have the protector trope. And what's interesting in this story is, why do they have to be twins if there's no incest? There are 3 sets of twins among the half-elven. These are the brothers-in-law, the sons, and the grandsons of Eärendil, the evening/morning star. So we have a celestial connection. We also remember that the Silmaril itself is a celestial object. And as myself and others have argued, Elwing herself can be considered a celestial object as the planet Mercury meeting the planet Venus. We also now have in the half-elven this mixed mortal-immortal, and of course we have a connection to sailors. Elrond and Elros, look at how well this matches up. Remember that Elros was not there originally. Elrond was not a twin in the beginning, and he was actually by himself the first king of Numenor. We have tragedy. We have both brothers are founders. Their names are similar, and they are called by one joint name, the Paradil. Mixed heritage, celestial association, connection with sailors. They are protectors. There is a connection with female relative in the case of Elrond. Remember that he heals his wife, but he's separated from his daughter, so there's some subversion there. There's also a subversion in the fact that they are abandoned by their mother. Elrond only is a healer. And fun fact, I think Tolkien might have gotten the idea to make them twins from the fact that if you go back to Plato, the founders of Atlantis, which of course is where Numenor comes from, is 5 sets of twins who are the sons of Poseidon. Elladan and Elrohir, right? The sons of Elrond. They really don't do much in the story, but look how well they add up. Plenty of tragedy, names that are highly symbolic and rhyme, mixed heritage, celestial association, protection, right? They are the ones that rescue their mother. They swear an oath of vengeance upon the orcs. And they are the eyewitnesses when Aragorn has that oath with the dead, right? So they do play a role as people who make sure that the oaths are adhered to. They also, their sister, Arwen and Dumiel. Here we have another celestial event, right? Another celestial sister. This harkens back to the Dioscuri and Helen, and also even earlier back to Sanskrit to the Ashvins. To remind you, where did the Silmaril come from? Beren and Luthien bequeathed the Silmaril to their son Dior. The sons of Feanor attack Doriath. Dior and his wife are killed, but their daughter Elwing escapes with the Silmaril. In the very first version, Dior has a son who's cannon fodder. He's killed very quickly, right? And so Tolkien just writes him out because he doesn't have a reason to be in the story. Until Tolkien writes the son back in. But then he makes it 2 sons. Originally born 3 years apart. Then he makes them twins. Why do they have to be twins if they're just going to be killed off? And then he changes his mind and makes them 3 years apart again. Again, even though those sons don't really do anything in the story, look how well they match up with the rubric. Fun fact. The sons of Dior are similar in age to Ronald and Hilary when they lost their mother. And Elrond and Elross lost their father at the exact same age that Ronald lost his father. A little bit of autobiography, perhaps. Tolkien could pack meaning into 2 sentences. Fulcred and Fastred. These are in Appendix A of Return of the King. 2 sentences. Yes, it is not a complete matchup with the rubric, but if you're only writing 2 sentences, the fact that it matches the rubric this well, I think is highly symbolic. And finally, we have Amron and Omross, the youngest of the 7 sons of Feanor. Tragedy, that's all there is with the sons of Feanor, right? The names are obviously very similar. There's a celestial association with the Silmarils. Oaths, their entire lives are devoted to fulfilling the oath sworn with their father. But what's interesting is a very late legend about those 2 youngest twins written in the 1960s. There's a discussion between Feanor and his wife, Nurdinel. The mothers of the elves typically gave prophetic names to their children. And so Nurdinel gave the same name to both of the twins because they were redheads, called them Ambarusa, russet top. And Feanor said, you can't name both of our sons the same name. So Nurdinel says, okay, one of the twins will be named Umbarto, fated, but fate will sort out to which one that name belongs. And Feanor basically said, that's not a good choice either. I'm going to name one of them Ambarusa and one's going to be Umbarto. Years later, after the Silmarils are stolen by Morgoth, Nurdinel, who's, by the way, left her husband, realizing what a clown he is, begs Feanor not to take all of the sons away. At least leave me the twins. And he says no. And she said, at least leave me one of the twins. And he says no. And she proclaims that not all of them shall set foot on Middle-earth. And what happens is, if you remember, Feanor and his sons steal the swan ships. They get to Middle-earth and they burn them. In this late version, what happens is that one of the young twins goes back to one of the boats, supposedly to sleep, though it's said that perhaps he was going to sneak back to his mother, back to Valinor. Feanor he burns the ships, knowing that one of his sons is on the ship. So the mother's prophecy comes to pass. Now, this story was never incorporated into the legendarium officially. You don't read that version in the Silmarillion. But Tolkien apparently really wanted to work it in somewhere. And in the margins, he actually wrote down that one and then crossed it off and wrote 2 of the sons of Feanor died in the ship fires. And in one of his last writings about Meglin, rather than writing about the 7 sons of Feanor, he wrote about the 5 sons of Feanor. And Christopher Tolkien interprets that his father came to believe in his own personal headcanon that both of those younger twins died in that fire. So this is my last slide. This is the summary. And you can see here that I have the entire rubric. I have the 9 sets of twins. And I put a little red arrow to show you when, because this is all chronologically from the earliest to the latest. That red arrow shows you when he was writing the essay on fairy stories, when he would have been thinking most deeply about mythology, about Indo-European mythology, and about Mueller, and about these sorts of celestial twins. And I think you can see that there appears to be a correlation, that during and after this time period, he not only has lots of twins, and twins that don't really do anything. So it's like, why are they even twins? But they line up pretty well with this trope. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you, Kris. That was wonderful. And what a delightful PowerPoint as well. Okay, so we already have some questions for you in the Q&A. So let me start with one from John Holmes.
And I didn't realize that I didn't even have my video on, so you can't even see my lovely Elrond in the corner. Sorry, I didn't know I didn't have my camera on. But
so the first question is from John Holmes, and he asks, isn't the phenomenon of human/divine parentage in fraternal twins a staple of classical mythology? In addition to the Dioscuri, God-nurtured ones, we have Heracles and Iphicles, Helen and Clytemnestra.
Yep, Helen and Clytemnestra are the siblings of the Dioscuri. So that's the same myth. And where is it? One of the references that I was using, they argue that there are really only 2 examples of the true Dioscuri, the Dioscuri and Heracles and Iphicles. And that story of the dual parentage is really only the most recent, if you can call it most recent, of the versions of the Dioscuri myth. So it's actually turns out to be a bit of a old wives' tale or misconception that it's really widespread.
Okay, thank you, Kris. So the next question is from Doug Anderson, and he says, thanks, Kris. Is there a Mueller text that deals with the divine twins?
Yes, there are newer, meaning more recent. Well, there's Ward's. Yes, there is, and I can't find it in the huge pile of stuff that I have here, but as soon as, oh, hold on. Twin Horse Gods by Henry John Walker. This was 2015. There you go.
All right, thank you. So let me invite you to once again type your chat into, or sorry, type your question into the Q&A, and I'll be happy to ask it, to relay it to Kris. Okay, here we go. Doug Anderson says, I asked about a Mueller text, not a Newer.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry, Mueller text. Not about the divine twins per se. He was more interested in the solar myth and the overall myth, but the Ashvins, that first set of twins from the Rig Veda, they feature very heavily in his argument. And so in other words, he was using those twins to bolster his solar myth. He wasn't quite so worried about them as twins. It was Harris, J. Rendell Harris, who said, it's not just the fact that it's a nature myth, it's specifically the twins.
Thank you, Kris.
Mm-hmm.
So John Holmes asks, mythic connections with Hengist and Horsa.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there was Ward, who was the one that Bradshaw was quoting, the 1968, talks about those two, because what he does is he sets up the myth and then he tries to focus in on Germanic examples. So I would go to Ward's book to look at it, but yes, those are definitely put out as an example.
Great, thank you. And Jane Beale asks, are you suggesting that Tolkien knew the book that establishes your template? Why do you think he departed from the template frequently?
Because he's Tolkien and he does whatever he wishes to do. Part of it, I think, is also, if you look at any of these stories that are not his originally, he always puts that twist to them, like the Autru and Atrun, he puts a twist to it. The Calervo puts a twist to it. Sometimes it's a Christian twist. Sometimes it's his idea of eucatastrophe. I don't believe that, if you look at, for example, in Sigmund and Signy, there is actually a note that says that the fact that they are twins was an invention of him, of the author, of him. That's not in, in the original story. So he was aware that he was changing things and felt no compunction.
Good, thank you. So Chris Swank observes, of course, Tolkien uses Hengist and Horsa. And then we have a question from Nancy. Were Marcho and Blanco, Hobbit Shire founders, twins?
Not to anyone, not to any knowledge I've seen. They are brothers and they have similar names. But again, as I said, we have to be cautious. We have Boromir, Faramir. There are many of these who do have similar names. So that by itself is not a complete indicator, but it's part of the trope. Also, if you look at Bradshaw's paper in Tolkien Studies, she talks about those two Hobbit brothers. There's a discussion in Hammond and Skull about how their names derive essentially from horses. And so there's a whole big symbolic about those Hobbit names.
Good, thank you. We have time for maybe another quick question if someone wants to type it into the Q&A.
I think this is the most questions I've ever had on a paper.
All right, so we're gonna, there's a question from John Ratliff, and then I think this will have to be our last one, which is, a lot of people think of Fili and Kili as twins, but they're not.
Yep, there's a lot of them. And was it Owen, Glowin? Yeah, there's a whole pile of them that are not. But yeah, so that's why you can't just go by the names, but in the classic trope, that is one of the quote indicators to help you along the way.
Good, thank you. So let me just give one more round of applause for Kris. My applause will stand for everyone's, but thank you for a wonderful paper.
Thank you.